Thank you for joining us today. I'm Anna Peters with College Recruiter, where we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. And I'm excited to bring you today's topic. Stephen Rothberg, who is president and founder of College Recruiter, will be presenting on new strategies to engage Gen Z and other modern candidates. Stephen draws his expertise and his insight from working very closely for 27 years now with our customers, who are primarily Fortune 1000 companies and federal government agencies who advertise their part-time, internship, seasonal, and other entry-level positions with us to help them hire students and recent grads from 1 year, 2 year, 4 year colleges and universities. So quickly before we get started with Stephen, anybody watching, if you would like to be notified of upcoming webcasts or interviews, we do a lot of interviews with leaders in TA and HR across the country. You can go to our YouTube channel and click subscribe. So that is youtube.com/user/college recruiter. So with that, Stephen, I will give you the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna, for the intro. As you can hopefully see on my opening slide, I've got my contact information there. Feel free to call, email, tweet, in-mail me, whatever, either during the presentation or after, if I can be of any assistance regarding this topic or anything else that you think I might be able to help with. In today's webcast, we're going to have basically 5 main things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, the reference to questions. We already dealt with that, so look at the progress we're making. The other ones, I'm going to talk a little bit about the various generations that are in the workforce, and that's really not so much to compare and contrast them, but just to help ensure that everybody's on the same page regarding the definitions of the different generations. It's pretty subjective. Different people very reasonably would have different opinions as to exactly what birth years are included for, say, Gen Xers or Millennials or Gen Z. I'm going to talk at greater length about some of the attributes that we see with Gen Z. A lot of this is very stereotypical, tons of exceptions to the rule. But in some ways, it does help to stereotype so that you can kind of create a persona of the people that you're trying to engage with, recruit, hire, retain, hopefully. And we're going to then turn towards what their job search priorities are, what matters to them when they're searching for a job. And then towards the end, I'm going to do a little bit of a hat tip, some praise for some of the employers out there that I think are really well positioned to be successful recruiting Gen Z candidates, that they're positioned to really hire more than their fair share. And so if you are looking for best practices or some kind of a bar that you want to attain, then I would look no further than some of those organizations. So to start off with, baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. The definitions, the years that I'm using for these generations come from Wikipedia. One thing that I would like to keep just between us is that my wife is actually a baby boomer. And then when you move down to the next generation, that's me. So I am an entire generation younger than she is. Actually, we're only about 2.5 years apart. But Gen Xers, often called the forgotten generation, we're sort of in that little lull. Baby boomers were, at the time, the largest generation in history. A lot of the politicians and stuff, people in control of large enterprise organizations, and those that are sort of just into retirement age and sort of an approaching retirement age, that's that baby boomer generation. Then there was a far smaller generation, the Gen X, which is mine. And then we came along and we had another huge generation. Some people call them Gen Y, some people call them millennials. It's the same thing. And these are people who are now, the oldest, are in their mid, even late 30s. Very, very common for them to have a home, have a mortgage. They've been in the workplace for 10, sometimes 15 years. They're in management. a lot of them. They've got kids, they're saving for retirement. So anybody that sort of thinks of millennials as being today's college students, that's strictly speaking true. Some millennials are still in college. The vast majority of them are now well beyond college. And so the generation that we're going to be talking about today, Gen Z, this is the generation that is now just starting into college. Depending upon who you talk to, the earliest birth year for Gen Z is, roughly to the year 2000. And so the people of that generation are of that birth year are graduating from high school or just entering college. So for those employers that are listening in onto this, that these are the people who you are now starting to see applying for jobs. That if you are running a restaurant, hospitality, retail, stores, then you are probably seeing a lot of these people already. If you are more, say, on professional services, hiring engineers, then you have not yet seen these people coming into the workforce, but you are just about to. So baby boomers, largest generation in history, until the millennials came along, and the millennials were the largest generation in history. Stereotypically, baby boomers thought the world revolved around them, and I think justifiably so. They did change a lot, and because of sort of when they came of age in that boom period in North America and much of the Western world, and the size of the generation, it was by far the most educated generation in history. They really did impact a lot. Again, stereotypically, they worked hard. They lived to work. They aspired to that corner office. Very money motivated. They strongly prefer when they're communicating to be face to face. And so you very typically see when baby boomers are scheduling a meeting or requesting a meeting that they want to do that in person. They want to sit around that conference room table. And what they were looking for in most cases, but rarely got it, was that lifetime employment. They expected that when they graduated from high school or college or maybe with an MBA or whatever, that they would go to work for an organization and they would be there for their entire working career. Again, that rarely worked out. Gen X, my generation, much, much smaller, about half as many as the generations both preceding us and immediately after us. We've kind of lived our lives in the shadow of baby boomers, and a lot of times when you talk to a baby boomer about generations, they think that the generation immediately after baby boomers are millennials, and it's like, hello, I'm right here. We work to live to an extent, but we have much more of a work-life balance. So Gen Xers stereotypically career-oriented. We certainly want things that money is necessary for, and yet at the same time, we value our free time and leisure to a greater extent than the average boomer did. We tend to be more independent and adaptable. Our world had a little bit more turmoil in it in terms of things like the economy. And rapid shifts back and forth between different political ideologies. When I kind of came of age, for example, Reagan was president. I don't really remember Nixon as president. I have faint memories of Carter. But when you went from Carter to Reagan, and then a decade later, then you had Clinton in the White House and all of the political back and forth. There was a lot more turmoil in that sense. We grew up in the Cold War, and we also, much more so than boomers, question authority. We didn't just sort of accept what we were told to do. We wanted to know why to a greater extent than boomers. Now, Gen Y, again, largest generation. They are currently the largest generation. Some of that is simply demographics. Boomers, the oldest ones, are sort of well past the age of retirement, and clearly a lot more of them are dying than millennials. The Gen Y or millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. That tipping point happened, I think it was about a year, maybe 2 years ago now. And there is a significant difference between the oldest members of Gen Y and the youngest members. Again, the oldest members of Gen Y are getting into their late 30s, mortgage, kids, probably in management, if that's kind of the occupational field that they're in or career path they're in. The youngest are still in college. There is a huge difference between a 19, 20-year-old who's in college, maybe halfway through their education, their post-secondary education, versus somebody who graduated 15 years ago and now has, 2 kids, a dog, a husband, and a mortgage. Gen Y stereotypically very much into the collaboration, and they want to interact with coworkers right now. So they don't like to wait for that weekly meeting in the conference room. They are much more apt to text a message to their coworker who works 20 feet away from them to get that immediate answer. And they also have very, very little loyalty to their employers. And I think that's because employers have demonstrated over the past few decades, but by and large, they have very little loyalty towards their employees. And so it's a little bit of a tit for tat, if you will. Gen Z, this is the generation that is entering the workforce now. The oldest members, 17, 18 years of age. They're going to comprise, within just a couple of years, 20% of the workforce. These are the first members of the workforce that we can call digital natives. They do not remember a time when they did not have fast, easy, at your fingertips access to the internet. The next generation, who knows what they're going to be called, Generation AA or whatever it might be, they'll be the first generation that has always had a smartphone around. But Gen Z, the oldest members of Gen Z, definitely remember a time when their parents, maybe older siblings, cousins, or whatever, were transitioning from feature phones, where all you could do is basically make a phone call and text, and transitioning over to smartphones where you had access to apps, Facebook, Twitter, web pages, etc. Some of them that have Gen X parents like me, who were kind of an early adopter with technology, they'll remember us on Blackberries. But really, for their entire life, they have thought of a computer as a device that is connected to practically every other computer in the world. And that is absolutely not the case with millennials. Millennials remember dial-up. This generation, Gen Z, has lived their entire life with the US at war. We went into Iraq when Gen Z was either like just in sort of that toddler age, or in many cases even before they were born. They've known only economic strife, where the Great Recession at a very young age, 6, 7, 8 years old, they saw parents, they saw uncles, aunts, older cousins, maybe older siblings, losing jobs, people's houses being foreclosed on, and then the long economic recovery from that. They tend to be very active in how they learn. They want to use multimedia. They're sort of a 2-screen generation, not at all unusual to see them watching a TV show on their laptop while also texting with a group of friends about that show on their smartphone. And they're able to multitask very well like that. Their brains, quite frankly, are simply wired differently. And they believe very strongly in creating content, connecting with people, not just close friends, but people around the world, and affecting change. And I think, over the last month or so, since we had the shootings in Parkland, Florida, we've seen some of that this generation has been able to make a substantial change in the gun laws already, far more so than any of the other mass shootings, because of the skills that they have been taught, not only by their schools, by the school in Parkland, but also just it's a generational difference. Everyone now owns a printing press. Everyone has a phone where they can instantly share content and advocate with hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of people all at the same time. Despite what you hear from a lot of other people, this is a very mature generation. They have the lowest rates of drug use, alcohol use, tobacco use, and pregnancy of any generation at this point. If you look at 18-year-old Gen Zers and compare them to millennials when they were 18, or Gen Xers when they were 18, or baby boomers when they were 18, that this generation is using, these, let's call them vices, at a far lower rate and being far more protective of unwanted pregnancies. They are minimalists. If you offer them an opportunity to go from, say, having 2 weeks of vacation to 3, or somewhat of a raise, virtually all of them are going to take that extra week of vacation. They would rather have experiences than things. They are totally fine living in a smaller apartment, for example, in order to have enough money to go on a really cool vacation or to go rock climbing or something like that, than having something fancy up on a shelf. They're very different in that respect from baby boomers. And again, despite what the conventional wisdom is, this generation is career focused. They grew up with a lot of economic strife. They saw parents, older siblings, cousins being laid off, not able to regain their former level of income, a lot of times underemployed. And this generation understands that money matters and that they are going to have to work for it. It doesn't mean that they're trying to maximize their income, but they do want to earn enough money that they can afford to live. And this generation, far more so than Gen Xers and baby boomers, understands that a huge portion of their paycheck for probably the next 2 decades is going to go to the banks to pay back student loans. And that's a burden that none of the other generations had, other than the youngest millennials. So they are savvy. Again, looking at the Parkland students, you see this. They understand that the world is diverse and it is non-binary. It's not female, male. This is a generation that has grown up understanding that there are people who aren't sort of strictly identifying themselves as being male or strictly identifying themselves as being female. They're very comfortable with same-sex marriages, with people who are transgender. They want very badly to have a positive impact on the world. They will trade off personal benefits to benefit the community, not just that they live in a little gated community where they're taking care of their neighbor, but also people that they don't know, people who live halfway around the world. They have a lot more friends and peers than previous generations, in some ways because it's easier for them to reach out. So their social circles tend to be larger, which means that you as an employer have a greater ability to impact a larger group of people. If you connect with a smaller group of Gen Zers, you can leverage those relationships to then connect with a larger group by getting them to spread the word, hopefully positive word. It's probably true, though, that their relationships tend to be not as deep as previous generations. If you've got 5 friends versus somebody who has 500, you have more time to spend with those 5 friends than someone who has 500. Does that make one better or worse? I don't think so. I see merits and demerits for both of them. And then because they've basically always been connected to the internet, the concept of having to wait for things, if I want to do some research, I have to go to the library during banking hours, or it's Sunday, so I can't get into this place. It's just not there. I joke a lot about, if we only had a way of looking up that information before the time the library opens tomorrow at 10 a.m. The reality is the world is quite literally at our fingertips. So if you say to a member of Gen Z, let me get back to you in a week with the answer to that, they're going to look at you like you're from Mars. And to an extent, they're right. They're always online, and yet the vast majority of them, almost 80%, think that they spend too much time online. So when you read these surveys about what percentage of time they're online or on Facebook or whatever, don't take that at face value. It doesn't mean that they want to be this way. It doesn't mean that they think this is the right thing. It just means that this is what's actually happening. 71% of them are on Facebook every day. But 82% of them feel like they have to be careful about what information they share. My generation on Facebook, we share lots of stuff. I share, well, not so much anymore, probably thankfully for most of my friends, but I'll share like photos of what I'm eating. Who cares? Gen Z, far less likely to share stuff like that, far less likely to share their location than, say, a member of Gen X or a baby boomers. They're very comfortable buying online. They are go to Amazon and buy clothing, shoes, laundry detergent, whatever, no problem whatsoever. But that doesn't mean that's how they prefer to do. They actually prefer to buy in shops, and specifically local. They are turned off by large national chains, and they would much prefer to buy, to patronize small family-owned shops, restaurants, etc. And one thing that I find kind of amusing is that it's slightly over half. If they had to make a choice between giving up their smartphone and giving up their sense of smell, little over half would give up their sense of smell. That's a pretty powerful indicator of just how connected they are to their phone. Our phones have essentially become a sixth sense. So from an employment standpoint, employment branding, things that to really think about is that brand matters. So when you're kind of thinking about all of these people over the last 5 years or so have been trumpeting employment brand, employment brand, employment brand. I've heard from a lot of older people in talent acquisition who have been doing a great job for 20, 30, 40 years that what is all this about employment brand? They're skeptical about the value. It's real. It matters to this generation. It might not matter that much to a 60-year-old, but trust me, it matters greatly to a 17-year-old. And if they see you using an old device, a 10-year-old laptop, a BlackBerry, an old flip phone or whatever, they just understand that you are not with it, that you are just not going to be able to speak their language. So when they come into the office and you are giving them equipment, whether it's a company phone, whether it's a computer or whatever, make sure it's up to date. It does not need to be the latest and greatest, but for gosh sake, don't give them equipment that's 8 years old. They want very badly to be financially secure. 83% is a pretty high number. 17% probably accidentally checked the wrong box. But 65% of them worry about their financial security. So again, you see that disparity where a huge percentage want to save. And in previous years, that would have meant that they are saving, that they are going to be financially secure because they're saving. But 2/3 roughly worry about financial security. So in other words, they feel like they're not able to save as much as they want. And again, we're going back to student loans for that. This is the first generation that caring about others, not just your neighbor, not just the people that you sit next to in church, but people halfway around the world that you know nothing about, that matters greatly to them. 26% regularly volunteer. And let me remind you that this is a generation that is just starting to emerge from high school. So when you're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-olds, a quarter of them regularly volunteering, that's a very large percentage because volunteer opportunities overwhelmingly are geared for adults. There are very few volunteer opportunities which are easy for young teenagers or people who are 14, 15, 16 to access. As I was indicating earlier, some of the social issues like same-sex marriage, overwhelmingly they are in support. And it's something that employers should really think about in terms of their mission statement and the business that they're in and what they do for their community, what they do for the world, is that about 1/3 of Gen Zers are willing to accept less money to work for an organization whose mission aligns with their values. So if your corporate mission is to essentially pollute the planet, you're going to have to pay that employee more than if your mission is to save the whales. Marketing, make your message short. In past years, the conventional wisdom was that a video that you post to YouTube that is a employment branding video, this is who we are, this is what we do, etc., that those needed to be within just like maybe 3 minutes or shorter. Well, that has greatly reduced. You need to make those videos now 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or it's just not snackable. They're not gonna watch it. Think Snapchat, think other media like that where they're sending each other photos, 8-second videos. You as an employer, if you want to speak to them, you have to speak their language. You're not going to change them. They are, however, changing you. Live stream content. I don't see very many employers embracing YouTube, embracing Facebook's ability to live stream. Have some of your Gen Z employees jump on Facebook and do a Facebook Live, walk around your office, show people what your production line looks like, have them do a quick little interview of their boss or their coworkers and share that live and uncensored to your Facebook page, to your YouTube page. Encourage those employees to share that content and other stuff about you. And again, keep it short. Don't do a Facebook live stream for an hour. None of these people are going to sit down and watch that. But if you do a 30-second or 2-minute conversation, you're gonna grab those people. And diversity. We need to stop talking about diversity as if that's the goal. This generation understands that it is far more about inclusion than it is about diversity. Organizations that still have people that have the word diversity in their job title, that screams archaic to this generation. It should just be part of what your organization is and does. Again, going back to the non-binary, you know, having had a President Barack Obama for 8 years, whose mother was Caucasian, whose father was quite literally African American. Was he black? You know, why would we look at his race as if it only came from his father's side? Why wouldn't we say he's Caucasian, his mother's side? This generation, a very large percentage of them and their friends do not consider themselves to be members of one race. And they also understand that gender is a spectrum. It's not a yes or no. Another thing is, when you're looking at diversity recruiting, if you're looking to increase the number of, say, African Americans in your workforce, do not think that you can only access that talent at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, or Hispanic Americans at Hispanic American colleges and universities. There are a lot of African Americans who attend just about every school in the country, and same with Hispanics. Those are good sources. They are by and large very good schools, but they are by far from the only ones. So in terms of the kind of organization, the largest organizations are actually faring pretty well in terms of what organizations Gen Z wants to work for. And small ones, surprisingly to me, when I started to dig into these numbers, small ones are not. Millennials wanted to work for startups. Gen Z does not. That is good news for Fortune 1000 and federal government agencies. And I think the reason for this is economics. They know that they are going to be financially more secure working for a larger organization because those organizations tend to go under less often. There's more job security with organizations that have been around for 50 or 100 years than organizations that have been around for 50 or 100 days. They absolutely embrace the old private office. A lot of organizations have gone to these big open floor plans, and Gen Z does not like that. Half of them prefer a private office. Yes, they want to collaborate, but they don't want to be forced to collaborate. They don't want to have to listen to the person in the cube next door pop her microwave popcorn and then have to smell that. They want to be able to focus on their work, collaborate when it's beneficial, and then move on. They also do actually embrace the face-to-face communications, interestingly enough, just like baby boomers do. And I think some of that is just the pushback against the technology. And yet they do see about half of them struggle with communication with baby boomers. And some of that's simply an age difference, but some of that's also just probably that their interests and their outlook is very different. Gen Z is looking forward to the next 40 years in the workplace. Baby boomers are looking backward. They've been in the workplace for a lot longer. So to the extent that you can have your managers be closer in age to Gen Z, that's a good thing. They collaborate better with Gen X, even more so with members of Gen Y. And they are actually a very optimistic generation. They want to retire early. They don't expect to retire early, but they are optimistic in the sense of that they want to work, they want to make money, they want to make, more than anything else, a difference. And the entrepreneurial aspect of this generation, not nearly what it was with millennials. So more of Gen Z is actually inclined to be kind of like baby boomers, working hard, moving up the corporate ladder. A lot of them, a third of them, see themselves as being managers within 5 years. And then benefits, the job search priorities, you gotta pay them, and you've got to make their work flexible. You've got to provide them with good healthcare benefits. They are looking for security. That really matters to them. If you try to push all of the risk onto Gen Z, you're going to find that the most talented are going to go across the street to your employers. And then some shout outs. These are some organizations that over the last couple of years have really looked at their productivity for their employees. Where are the best employees coming from in their workforce? Not just their lowest cost per hire, but the ones who are still with them 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 10 years from now, and where are they coming from? And they are becoming increasingly school agnostic, meaning that they don't restrict themselves to recruiting just at certain schools because that's where in the past we've recruited people. This is going to become increasingly important with Gen Z because Gen Z is less likely to go to those elite schools where they're going to have massive student loans. If you restrict yourself to the most expensive schools, you are going to be harming your diversity, better word, inclusion efforts. You are therefore going to be hurting your ability to be productive. The more diverse, the more inclusive a workplace, the more productive that workplace. So look hard at your recruiting process. Embrace things like assessments and gamification, new tools that are going to appeal to Gen Z that baby boomers never encountered and wouldn't know what to make of it. Asynchronous video interviews where you record a series of questions and candidates can then respond back. That's a good tool to reach out to students at a wide variety, hopefully even every school. And then artificial intelligence, it is coming, and this is going to be probably the first generation that is really, really impacted by it. Big change with technology now versus years ago and years past. When technology came into the workforce, it was the lowest skilled employees that were hurt. With AI, it's the other way around. The highest skilled positions are the ones that are the most likely to be impacted by AI, and Gen Z knows it. So they are going to be gravitating to roles that are going to be less likely to be impacted by AI than previous generations. It's pretty hard to replace a plumber with an artificial intelligence device like Watson. And that concludes my presentation. Apologize for going a couple of minutes longer than I anticipated. If you've got any questions, my contact information is here. And Anna, if you want to wrap up, that'd be awesome.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. That was great. Lots of good insight. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. You can reach Stephen if you didn't write down his contact information yet with questions related to entry-level recruiting or really anything for that matter at stephen@collegerecruiter.com. And again, I will remind you that we do a lot of video interviews with leaders in talent acquisition and HR across the country. So you can find those and you can be notified of those and other webcasts that we have scheduled by subscribing to our YouTube channel. youtube.com/user/college-recruiter, and just click subscribe. At College Recruiter, we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career, and we love working with employers who share that belief. Our employer customers are primarily Fortune 1000 companies and federal government agencies who advertise their part-time, their seasonal, their internships, and other entry-level jobs with us so that we can help them hire students and recent grads from 1 year, 2 year, and 4 year colleges and universities. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great day.